Allora, grazie.
Well, thank you so much to all of our speakers and obviously for their contribution, the contribution given in their own capacities. And at this point, some questions as a result of what they've told us, or if one of our guests want to ask something. Are there questions from the audience? Does somebody want to ask a question?
Vedo male, quindi non so se ci sono. Ecco. Ci sono domande? No? Volevo fare una domanda? Sì. La vuole fare?
Questions? Yes, do you want to ask a question? We give you a mic. Yes.
Eccolo. Qui in prima fila, grazie.
Maurizio Pedrini.
Maurizio Pedrini, editor of the magazine Dimensione Pulito. As for the last speaker, it seems to me that there are very few companies that have raised this problem of energy independence. Some companies are acting in this direction, and institutions. What is the role that can be played by institutions? We have the National Recovery Resilience Plan, but we have to adjust it considering present problems. But in this phase, when the theme of energy has become so central and the possibility to produce electricity, don't forget that many companies are already facing a big crisis. Fortunately, not in our sector, but many companies feel the burden of the crisis and cannot see brightening prospects for the future. And apart from theories, projects and national recovery and resilience plan, what is requested from companies in terms of investments and mission? Passa l'acqua. Yes, passa l'acqua. Well, first answer, yes, for sure. There are so many companies. And it depends, of course, on the type of production and type of company. Many companies, also decades ago, were obliged to think about energy independence solutions. And I speak from my personal experience. I have the feeling that, in a way, we didn't have institutional communications. The concept of energy independence should have been promoted, and any entrepreneur should have in their own minds also the fear of the market and the prices we have seen, price increases we have seen. What can we do? I always sponsor a highly pragmatic approach, irrespective of the national resilience plan, irrespective of regional contributions and subsidies. Sometimes you get, sometimes you don't get. It's not the point. Yes, subsidies and contributions, if we get them, they are gifts, but I, as an entrepreneur, should streamline costs. And however, I should become aware of costs and the return of the investment. If I need a financial partner supporting me with specific formulas and in an extremely practical way. And after that, the concept of looking around and listening to 1,500 voices about what we might get, possible subsidies, it's what determines today these big prices, and many industries are at a loss yes, it was a perfect storm that could be hardly envisaged, and it's not so likely, but it was possible. When you have such a strong dependence in terms of energy, and when you depend so much on unstable countries, it was possible. And the market is undergoing a tension, but the market was under tension also before the Ukrainian crisis, and perhaps well, if you are an entrepreneur, if you have an industry, if you should streamline costs, you have to make investments helping you energy-wise. We shouldn't expect for a fall of the market, and be careful. And we have a historical precedent of the closing of the Nord Stream pipeline, and so there will be a tension point, and it will stay with us. And tension points give rise to speculative actions. The market where we buy electricity and gas is a critical market.
If you allow me, I'd like to tell you that the chart you showed evidence that starting from 2008 we have had problems of any kind. Is this situation the outcome of ideological debate that we witnessed in Italy on energy transition, on renewables? Well, it could be. No, apologies, but I might reword my question. And correct me if I'm wrong. I do not know whether NLX also deals with electrical vehicle supply equipment. We have the fetish of electric cars, as if we could solve all our problems related with sustainability thanks to electric cars, when we are well aware, at least this we learned in time, that you need an energy mix, that the electric car is not enough, or renewables are not enough. I'm saying so because this is the result of the debate, ideological debate that we have been witnessing in Italy. I'm asking you because you are an expert in this field. Yes, definitely. So it is very difficult to identify the energy mix that could guarantee a sustainable development, a quick development. It is not as simple as it seems. And then when you try and tackle the various problems, there are nuances that are very difficult to understand. But as NLX, we cannot, we cannot be slaves to a cultural political process that might be slower in Italy than in other countries where there are strides, but then there is a slowdown. But this is very standard. These are things we are aware of. What I believe is that what was critical was the entrepreneurial long-sightedness. Should I be an entrepreneur, I would disconnect from the grid, not because I don't want to be connected, but because I need a very clear strategy about my protection energy-wise. Given that the tools were out there, it was a cautious approach by the industry. Let's think about the future when the problem, let's think about the problems when they are there. electricity was 55 euro per megawatt hour. Now it is 550. It increased tenfold. But I don't want to sound pessimist. This is a matter of fact. The market is fluctuating, so I cannot sit on my laurels simply because electricity costs 55 euro per megawatt hour. The energy problem is out there. It should be solved, and each and everyone should find the best energy strategy. Yes, you're very right, but as you said, tensions were there even before Ukrainian war. Hopefully, things don't go like they went for COVID. We are well aware of what you said. Now our supply from Russia is just 10% of our energy need, but we shouldn't go back to the situation as it was before the Ukrainian war. You read that price cap might not be needed, but this is fearsome. My personal opinion is that irrespective of what you hear, you should be proceeding and not sit on your laurels, as this often happens in Italy. Is there anybody else who would like to add something about energy prices, energy supply? Stefano asked for the floor. Does this microphone work? Yes. This is something that definitely concerns the industry I work for, because alternative energy sources must be related to the space where they are being used. We also collaborated with tenants to check the possibility of providing a set of services. And energy services are part of this package. And also they account for a cost variable which plays a key role. I'm having a hard time to follow all the reasoning that was made here, because I believe that entrepreneurs should be considering their own strategy. They should be protecting themselves. Remember that financial investments oftentimes disrupt the results of a good economic management. There is a lot of speculation. You can't think of building a well below your office because there might be drought. I shouldn't be thinking of breeding cows because I might have problems with food, or that I should cultivate coffee beans in my yard in the factory because there might be a shortage of coffee beans. Well, that's unthinkable. The energy market is a sort of natural monopoly. And indeed, it falls under a political decision, so much so that it is the European Union that is dealing with it. It is the Italian government that is dealing with these energy decisions. And this is something that we cannot mandate to entrepreneurs, to distributed economy. Clearly enough, we all define our strategy, but we can rely these strategies on our economic calculations, and these calculations are related to our specific business. So this is what I think about this. Yes, okay. let's welcome these assessments. The electric car is nonsense. How do you produce this electricity? Because if I produce electricity by burning coal, then it is useless. The risk we run is to depend on manufacturers of batteries, such as China, will, in a way, threaten us sooner or later. Is there anything else? Tony asked for the floor. I have a question, and this also could give meaning to why we opted for this title, Integrated Service Management under New Normal. We worked on it for many months. And there are some considerations I'd like to make and a question I'd like to ask. From what we gathered from Mr. Cervone is that workspace has been going down in terms of footage. The fact that people decided to work from home has changed the morphology, so to say, of all our businesses. Lara said that the new normal place is being redefined in its borders, in its boundaries, based on the daily needs of workers and the companies. There is no doubt that technological impact causes disruptions and positive changes, more efficiency, active ingredients in drugs that are more effective. The cost of labor is a very important variable. This cost changes according to the countries. In some countries, robots are useless because they are more expensive than the labor force. Italy is a country that, if we accept some few larger cities such as Milan, has a very old real estate. These are buildings dating back to the 50s and 60s. Great hospitals or courts or schools are buildings that were built before the 80s, whose accessibility, which is very difficult. So the idea brings us back to Professor Vaca's statement. We should be figuring out an integrated process where all these variables are shared, thus allowing us to take a leap towards the future. When I decided to ask you about this new normal, what do you think about all these themes in the new normal, the cost of labor, batteries, energy efficiency, energy crisis, skills, training? Because we often forget that the theme of efficiency is closely related to the theme of training, because when comparisons are made between labor-intensive situations such as this one, the world of agriculture over the past 100 years increased its productivity by 90 times. The world of cleaning never changed, never increased its productivity. So I'm being provocative here, but my question to you all is, what do you think will happen in the future? If I understood well, I'd like to add one thing. There is also another characteristic. Services are more and more customized by us. So let's all answer by using a tweet, starting from Stefano. Given Tony's question. My answer is impossible, because I fully agree with my neighbor, Lara. No answer could be real. I mean, we don't have a crystal ball. What is the new normal? This is what we live on a daily basis. This hybrid between what is old, what is new, those who work from home and those who work in the office. and finding in the office very few aged people because that's the way they're used to working, and those who work from home because can use IT tools in a more resilient manner. But I'd like to remind you all that most of the people still need to make this shift. Speaking about integration, word service in English is connected to the concept of deserve, deserve and service. We need to develop a civic consciousness, we said in the morning, and in the cleaning world, the collaboration amongst the various users is not something trivial. And in Italy, mainly as for public spaces, spaces are maintained very badly. And this is not facility managers' responsibility. I wish that greater civic consciousness is part of this new normal. Lara, the floor is yours.
It's a big question. and I will try to keep my answer short. I think we need to stay resilient in every form that we can. I think having skilled people, skilled professionals will help us to continue to be resilient and to deal with changes that might occur rapidly or take longer term. So I'm very much in favor of having more skilled professionals and continue to train our staff in a good way so we can deal with changes that occur, whether those are coming from world crises like the energy crisis or the pandemic, or whether they are more on an organizational level. I don't have a crystal ball to predict the future. As I said, we will all have to be as flexible as possible. Stay agile. I think that's the only thing that we know. There's no solution. When it comes to labor costs, that is so different from country to country. I live in Belgium, which has a huge labor cost that is one of the highest in Europe. And we see that it becomes very, very difficult, and even more difficult than in other countries in Europe, to attract people because the costs are so high of hiring just operational staff. It's incredible. And companies start to look outside of the country as well to attract people because, that's the only way to move forward. That makes sense. So there's a role to play as well from a government perspective and from a European perspective as well to do something about that. Because, obviously that will help our industry for sure. Again, I think that's the shortest answer I can get. The rest is to be discovered in the future.
Sì, Michel Mash.
Well, I think there's clearly a need for better efficiency within our sector. We know the conundrum between high labour costs. We haven't got enough staff in the industry now. I mean, certainly in the UK, and I know in many other countries, there's a real crisis around recruiting enough staff. So just that by its very nature means that the industry is just going to have to work smarter and find new ways of creating different processes and where they can, using the new technology that becomes available, which I think we all know in this sector, it's very difficult to change minds and bring change about. We see so many people say, well, I've always done this like this, so why should I change? And there are so many ways in which the industry does need to come into the 21st century and make use of what is available. And we have to do that now because it's absolutely necessary.
Lynn Webster, prego.
Thank you, Michelle. I think I support most of what you've said there. I also think there's a defence for the service provider here. We've talked about efficiencies. We've talked about occupation of buildings. We've talked about being flexible in terms of the service that we provide. I also think, though, a very straightforward and simple mindset. The building hasn't shrunk. Essentially, whoever actually occupies the building is part of that service delivery issue that we're all debating. But those buildings aren't any smaller. So when we're looking at efficiencies, we still have to clean the same surface area of floor, whether it's got 10 people or 100 people. Thank you.
Grazie. Lorenzo Montioli, prego.
Lorenzo. Tony raised a question that would require another whole day, and allow me to make a commercial. It will be one of the themes in next conference, December 13th and 14th. If I may, I'd like to take this opportunity. Andrea, you spoke, well, there's a sector we haven't talked about in this new normal sector that is encountering problems, and after the closing of offices and the food service sector, and the sector that is suffering the most is the sector of canteens. And in Confindustria, I represent that industry and collective food service, and at long last, with the new government, we hope, and we spoke about price reviews, and it's one of the sectors where they didn't have the price review, and the service industry, unfortunately, it accounts for 2 times the world of building, and it is still neglected. The expectations about the new tender code that the state should make available tomorrow or in the next few days, I'm not so highly optimistic, despite we worked so much on it. So I'd like to take this opportunity, just a minute, because there's a sector that is vital and fundamental. I'd like to remind you that there are some children in Italy that can eat a full meal, just a full meal a day, thanks to collective food service companies and also schools and hospitals. Such companies are going through a dramatic moment, all of them. And for example, Barilla pasta, before the war, the price was a certain price, and today it is 4 times higher. And so allow me to say that in Italy, in Rome, the capital, they could have an important tender, and at last they didn't speak about price but cost, and a benchmark was set for all companies, and then that's a fundamental theme. So the new normal, first of all, should guarantee each and everyone a meal, and if something doesn't happen, companies will be obliged to interrupt a service. La Guardia. Yes, Tony's question is a question just like a question on the sense of life. We would need philosophers. I don't know what happens, but I'd like to say what I like to see. We are present, you have trade unions, politicians, the public administration, and so on and so forth. But there's no dialogue, and the object is the same. First thing that should be done, just like Tony says, is to establish a dialogue. The dialogue should be started by the government through industrial policies that are no longer mentioned. We don't have industrial policies. We run after emergencies, but there's no idea about what to be done. The theme he touched, maintenance, real estate, heritage. I like to start with a disaster. In the market, it's not the fault of storms. There's been a tender for 40 years for maintenance of the territory, and that tender is bogged down, and people don't remember why it is bogged down. In that area, there are no tenders for the cleaning of riverbeds and also green areas. It's not the fault of the storm. If you simply had an industrial policy on maintenance, for example, we would give jobs to thousands of people, because that's what this country needs. Yes, probably there's an integrated project, a national resilience recovery plan, billions, and so on and so forth. And when you walk in cities, do you have the perception that something is happening? No, because such tenders connected to a national resilience plan take place in the usual place. And if we wanted to do something serious for each mission, we would have needed a commissioner. So we are stuck. And a project, for example, in Apulia, to create a railroad, an environmental association blocked that creation of a railroad. We cannot go on like that. And so we need to trigger a set of processes. Thank you so much. Avril?
I suppose similar to some of our colleagues here today, as long as we have minimum cost being a priority in tenders, it's going to be difficult for the industry to move on. I think that's being tackled in a lot of countries, and it is a big improvement for us, and we can be more effective and efficient in our industries in that way. Another area I think is very important is in terms of standards, minimum requirements, minimum training. So we talk about the requirement to be more efficient, and yes, training is one of those things, but I think you see in certain industries whereby there's demanded, guaranteed, I suppose, minimum standards that come and it is enforced by maybe at a government level, that you see efficiencies and standards completely drive up. For example, in Ireland, in the construction industry, there's minimum standards. You cannot attend work unless you meet those. In the cleaning industry, the mandatory standards are those that might just be put into a tender by our client, and it's not something that is being said at a government level. This is what we need to ensure people are able to undertake their job safely in the cleaning industry and to actually do the job effectively. And I think finally, we can also achieve more efficiencies in the future with the assistance of cobotics and robotics, but they have to greatly reduce in cost before that's going to be effective within our industry.
Grazie. Sentiamo.
Thank you so much. Passa l'acqua. Obviously, I have no idea and I cannot give an answer. I have a fear and a hope. My fear is that the new normal may be similar to the previous one, and it would be a disaster. And it's also true that we can learn a lesson from history. And the hope, going back to what was said by LaGuardia and Cervone, is that a step forward is taken in the concept of civic sense, because if you have an increase in civic sense, you have an increase in the system of cooperation, help, streamlining of aid and resources, and so it becomes a global process. Well, that's the desired direction. Apart from the responsibility of individual people, the institutional political role is of crucial importance, and I'd like to go back to what was said during the panel of philosophers. And objectively, investing in those instruments that can increase civic sense, well, is interesting. There's another point, it's another hope, that till we have precise language, thought cannot be fully expressed. That's what Heidegger said. It's important to say it. Just like I said before, yes, you can have a national, supranational entity and indication of models, and also indication of processes to be followed. And in the case of final users, in my sector, consumers, well, something was not so clearly explained, and communication from this perspective, and also in this case, we would need a public hand and strong hand. We shouldn't streamline or limit, but we should foster the competence of communication, competence of language, competence of description. And it should be physical help. And yes, when the thought can be described in a sufficiently clear way, well, at that point, thought can be developed and I can have an evolution. Thank you so much. And even before concluding, and with regards to what we said, the new normal, and so on and so forth, and La Guardia, again, Andrea La Guardia, you mentioned, and yesterday we spoke about it, hospital-acquired infections, and I say something simple. Let's think about costs of hospital infections and repercussions and prevention of such infections, because yesterday we spoke about infections. I'd like to give you a simple example. See, hepatitis, there are drugs eradicating the disease, and screening was organized, and then COVID arrived, and as we have a regional system, there's no coordination, but they've just started screening measures, and also the investment made by the health ministry in terms of innovative drugs. It's an investment, it's not a cost, because indirect costs of hepatitis C is huge. And the problem is that in conferences, meetings between experts, they speak about it, but things were not done. And the bitter note is as follows. I've been dealing for healthcare for 25 years, and everybody speaks about the importance of not working in a watertight environment, but let's see what it means for patients. And I heard with my ears a top manager from the state, he said, "You're crazy," and instead the biggest healthcare experts, that's what they say. And what does it all teach us? What has COVID taught us, and what has the energy crisis taught us? And it's a comment. You spoke about it. Yes. It's a very important theme, because just like Professor Ricciardi said, it's a weeping, continuous pandemic that leads to deaths, which is the most dramatic element. The bilateral entity, together with Ricciardi for Sustainable Development, is carrying out a research to prove what? That in hospitals, where they spend the most, I'm sorry if I use such terms, but where they spend more for sanitizing and cleaning, and in those hospitals, where they integrated sanitizing and cleaning inside hospitals. Well, if I clean and after a minute somebody makes it all dirty and they don't know that I cleaned. So cleaning should be part of the processes of hospitals. And during COVID, for example, hospital infections collapsed because nobody could get into hospitals and physicians had to go around with masks and the uniform. And today, infections are coming back because those protocols are not implemented and spending has decreased. And it's a question of how much this country is willing to pay and looking beyond a 3-year tender, doing what you did, calculations. And we need to have different tenders and competitive dialogue with the market and tendering units can consult companies and asking them what the most innovative technologies are. And we need a fundamental change in direction in terms of public spending for such services. I don't know if you want to add something. Can I ask a question?
Mi ricollego a
I'd like to refer back to this last thing. Given that I deal with Italian and European journals in power generation and buildings, we saw that the 3 deaths in the construction industry a day are not related to the fact that developers are not paying attention to this aspect, but as Mattioli said, this renowned tender code should be reviewed. It is the contracting of works at minimum cost that is detrimental. What kind of stuff can you use if you bid at the lowest possible price? Only the lowest levels, unskilled workers. Ricciardi mentioned 150 people dying because of hospital infections, HAI. This is not due to the fact that the sanitizing hospitals is not done properly, but Italians keep swallowing antibiotics through the food chain. Unless we control distribution of antibiotics in animal husbandry, in the poultry field, then we keep swallowing antibiotics and we develop resistance to antibiotics. If the government needs to take steps, it should be doing this upstream. What can we do in the cleaning industry? Well, my question to Mr. Mattioli, being the president of FG, what is the profitability of the 500,000 cleaning companies in Italy versus the profitability of foreign companies in this field? Yes, thank you very much. I have something to add. Speaking about antibiotic resistance, definitely livestock husbandry has this problem in Italy. Solutions are, in a way, looking for solutions, but it is also true that pharmacological companies haven't been developing antibiotics over the past few years. I'll be very short. I'd like to refer back to what you said about the Italian Court of Accounts, because I have plenty to say. Suffice to think, now Cottarelli has been elected as a Democratic Party members of Parliament. Can you hear my voice? Yes. You all remember the season we lived when Cottarelli said, let's start a spending review and sanitizing services were being considered as accessory services, periodical services in hospitals. So I remember that there is an investigation being carried out by the Republic Public Prosecutor that concerns the hospital of Bergamo. Remember the tanks transporting corpses during the pandemic, and it was scientifically shown that there was no sanitizing there because the specifications did not include sanitizing, and people died. Before we saw that in Italy the turnover of staff is 11%. The contracts agreements are different according to the countries, but all European associations agree with this, that the minimum cost is the worst disease that we should be fighting. In Italy, if we translated the EU directive from English to Italian, adopting the so-called soft law, it would have solved all our problems, because the problem is definitely very serious. We pretended nothing occurred, and the fact that sanitizing is considered a cost, sanitizing is no longer mandatory. So what had become a mantra is no longer part of the contracts, irrespective of the fact that they will get more than 30 billion euro for sanitizing. Sanitizing have been cut. Lara Pyman must leave, but everybody can leave. Thank you very much for following us with such great attention. We close the 6th edition of the Forum Issa Pulire, and we'll meet again next edition. Thank you, Tony D'Andrea, and thank you to Issa Pulire Forum. Thank you very much.